Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. Workers shouldn't have the legal protection if they want to wear religious symbols at work. That's according to the Equalities Minister, Lynn Featherstone. She's instructed government lawyers to oppose the claims of Christian workers who've been banned from displaying the symbol of faith at work. But the move puts the government at odds with its own equality quango. The Equality and Human Rights Commission is to argue in the same European Court of Human Rights that workers should have legal protection if they want to display a token of their religious faith at work. So should there be the right to wear a religious symbol at work? Is it just a health and safety issue or a wider case of religious equality? Joining me in today's discussion is Nigel Barnes from the Hampstead Humanist Society, Terry Sanderson, the President of the National Secular Society, Andrea Williams, the Director of Christian Legal Centre, and Vakhtang Kibshitsia from the Group for Freedom of Religion and Belief at the Organisation for Security Cooperation in Europe. I'll begin with you, Andrea. Should there be a right to wear a religious symbol at work?
Well, absolutely, there should be. What's quite extraordinary, particularly in the cases that we see coming before the European Court, is that two women who'd worn a cross around their neck for many years were suddenly found themselves victim to new health and safety rules and were asked to remove the cross, and they refused to do so and found themselves then at odds with their employers, demoted. Nurse Chaplin had worked doing frontline nursing for some 30 years and was put back into doing filing so that she wouldn't have any patient contact.
Nigel from the Hampstead Humanist Society.
Yes, well, I feel that a lot depends on the reaction of other people to what you're wearing. Personally, I have no objection to religious symbols in a public place. It really depends on individual cases. The difficulty with having a law on the subject is that you have to have precision in a law. A vague law is a bad law. And what is a religious symbol? It seems simple on the face of it, but it isn't.
And Terry Sanderson from the National Secular Society.
Religious symbols are not banned at work. There's no ban on religious symbols. What they're banning is the use of jewellery, which is inappropriate, either over a uniform, which then makes it not a uniform, or for health and safety reasons, which are the two reasons given in these cases. They weren't banned because they were crosses. They were banned because they were jewellery, which were not permitted in that particular working environment. So this whole thing is based on a fallacy that religious symbols are not acceptable in the workplace. Just isn't true.
And Vakhtang from the OSCE.
In Russia, for me, it is quite unexpected to hear that British courts are following the way the revolutionary structures followed in Russia in 1917, when they totally banned all expressions of belief in public sphere and tried to prosecute all the Christians who tried to express their feelings in this way. It's why I think that British Christians should be entitled to wear the symbols of their faith and also to practice their beliefs and the principles which are dwelling from their faith in public sphere and not only in private sphere. When I hear the arguments about that court ban was actually jewelry, I can't agree with this, because in that case you can simply put a cross made from wood, for example, or any other not valuable material, and the problem will be solved this way, but it is not so, as I understand.
Terry Sanderson, you're shaking your head.
Absolutely, that's the most ridiculous comparison I've ever heard. Christians in this country have got more freedom than anywhere in the world. Their rights are protected under the Human Rights Act. Under every human rights charter that's ever been written, they're guaranteed the freedom to worship and practice their religion in any way that they want to. I don't know how many times I have to say it, but it's not about crosses at work. It's about jewellery and health and safety concerns, or wanting to uphold a uniform policy, which would be violated if people started wearing adornments, which is what happened at British Airways. They didn't say, we don't like crosses. They said, would you mind wearing it under your uniform? They didn't say to the nurse, we don't like crosses in this hospital. They said, would you mind pinning it inside your pocket so that it doesn't pose a health and safety risk? So this idea that Christians are being persecuted is absolutely ridiculous, to the point of stupidity.
It's not ridiculous at all. I mean, indeed, at the Christian Legal Centre, we're managing at any one time 50 cases. This morning we've had 2 calls come in for Christians who find themselves in trouble in the workplace simply as a result of living and speaking out their faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, Terry wants to make this purely a health and safety issue, but I managed the case of Shirley Chaplin at the Christian Legal Centre, and for sure she'd been doing frontline nursing for 30 years. She'd put on this cross, which for her was a great manifestation of her Christian faith and a great motivation for why she was actually nursing.
But Terry's saying that there's not a concern there; it's just a health and safety issue.
Well,
Why not hide it away?
What I was going to do was just explain how the case unfolded in the case of Shirley Chaplin. She'd worn that little tiny cross for some 30 years without any incident at all. When she was asked to take it off, she said that she wouldn't be able to do that. The hospital made concessions for Muslims to wear hijabs, and we had plenty of evidence with regard to that. There became a question at the tribunal as to whether the cross was a Christian symbol. Now, having this sort of question in a British court is something that's quite extraordinary, and indeed in the government's submission on this to the European Court, they question whether or not the cross is a symbol of faith. So actually, that's
not true.
That goes to that goes to a point of absurdity.
No.
But the reality is, as the case unfolded with Shirley Chaplin, we made every effort to ensure that the health and safety risks were minimised. So first of all, she agreed that she would wear a magnetic clasp because, certainly initially this had not been an objection. They began to make the health and safety rule an objection a way into the case. So they began to, as it were, mould the case to this. She refused. She said she would put on a magnetic clasp so that if anyone pulled on it, it would come off immediately. She was asked to pin it to her uniform. She asked to pin it to the outside of her uniform. They said quite clearly that that the cross should not be visible, that there should not be essentially a visible manifestation of her faith. So when pushed, that became clearly the issue, the visibility of the cross in this particular sphere. And we had plenty of evidence to show that concessions were made to other faiths, so there wasn't a level playing field. And in a sense, everything she sought to try to do that was absolutely reasonable was not permitted by them.
Yeah.
Nigel Barnes from the Hampstead Humanist Society. Is this a matter of health and safety for you, or a wider issue?
Well, if you take individual cases, you can go on forever. I think general principles are involved. For example, it's quite a possible scenario in London to have a Catholic nurse wearing a cross in a hospital where most of the patients are Muslims. So the hospital might say, look, actually you're causing a bit of trouble, would you mind not wearing it? That's a situation that I can imagine. But wearing a cross in a public place wouldn't worry me at all. It really depends on each situation. If you take one situation and draw general principles from it, I think that's unsound.
There seems to be a wider case
if
that...
I may,
Yeah, sure, Vachta.
if I may interfere, well, do you have anybody of Muslim or Jewish faith around our table? I think no, but I have, for example, a kind of information from my friend who worked, I think, for 30 years in the religious sphere at the office of Archbishop of Canterbury. I had a talk with him 2 days ago, and he told me that nobody from Muslim or Jewish faith is against wearing religious symbols of Christianity in public sphere. And it is not very, I think, correct to speak on behalf of Jewish or Muslim people saying that they're against. They're actually not against, because they also want to demonstrate their own religious symbols in public sphere. So, and beside that, we are always speaking about some kind of minority that whose rights could be violated by wearing crosses at work. But what my friend from London, he's a priest, a vicar at one of the London's congregations, he told me that, in fact, Britain has only 3,000 or 4,000 of people who are very aggressive in this sphere, who are against of public demonstrations of any religious symbols, and they are very loud, and they're trying to, in fact, impose their point of view on everybody else. And I think it is not also about democracy in your country.
I'll come back to Terry from the National Secular Society.
Look,
you're imposing their views, apparently.
There are people up and down this country, from Land's End to John O'Groats, who are wearing crosses and other religious symbols in their workplaces at this very moment without any problem whatsoever. Just occasionally there is some kind of issue with uniforms or health and safety or other things. For instance, if I saw a newsreader wearing a very prominent religious symbol when they had to report news of religious conflict, for instance, I wouldn't be very pleased with that. I think that they should present the news absolutely neutrally, with no indication of where they're coming from. They're there to deliver the news, not to tell you what they think. Otherwise, I've seen people in this very building wearing crosses today, and it doesn't bother me in the least. The only time it's a problem is if there is a health and safety, or if the employer wants to enforce a uniform code which is violated by jewellery, not by crosses, by jewellery.
Angela, you're shaking your head. I'll bring you in here.
It's interesting because Terry's view really is that in terms of one of the arguments that he makes over and over again is that somehow the neutral space is a removal of religion from the public square. So that's somehow for a newsreader to be neutral, she would have to have, for instance, no particular religious adornment.
Absolutely.
But that it's absolutely wrong. What secularism leads to is its own imposition of religion. And if anyone that wants to come in and actually oppose that, or speak of something else, or speak of belief, they find themselves removed from the public sphere. So increasingly what we have in this country is where Christian rights compete with secular rights, we find that the Christians are removed from the public sphere.
So you're seeing the increasing secularisation of society?
Increasing secularisation means that there is, in effect, a religious bar to office in certain situations.
Absolute
this is particularly...
bonkers.
This is not bonkers.
Ridiculous.
It's not bonkers at all. And
Why-
I need to
why
make
is
the
that,
case.
Terry?
I do need to make the case, I think, for it, so that he can perhaps respond to it. The equalities laws, there's, for instance, if there's a competition of rights between sexual orientation laws and Christian religious rights, there what actually happens continually is that the Christian rights loses to the sexual orientation rights. So we find that Christian registrars that don't have a conscious objection to presiding over same-sex civil partnership ceremonies, they lose their jobs, or they don't get the jobs. Foster carers that won't promote the practice of homosexuality aren't able to foster. Social workers that have a conscientious objection to placing with two mothers or two fathers find themselves in trouble at work. Over and over again, we find the Christians removed from the public sphere or unable to access the space. And there is not a level playing field in this. Over and over again, it's the Christian who's losing in this situation. Certainly, Christians aren't banned from the space in the way that they are in other places in the world. We're not seeing persecution where Christians are actually being killed and maimed, as we
you're
today
seeing
we
a problem
see.
with secularisation.
We're
So can I
beginning
just bring in Terry
to
here?
we're beginning to see it.
There seems to be a problem with secularisation as far as Angela...
It's a religion. Secularisation is
as
secularism
far
is
as
a religion.
Andrew is concerned, that secularisation is
I
causing
think
a problem here. In fact, I'm just going to come to Terry first, and then we'll come back to you. Terry.
Well, secularism is a political construct that works hand in hand with democracy to ensure that everybody has an equal say in society. And Andrea should welcome it, because in some societies, Christians are persecuted because of another religion has dominance and control of the state. And that's what secularism seeks to prevent one major religion taking control and persecuting minor religions. And to say that, secularism is some kind of other religion that's seeking to shove everybody else out is just untrue. It's just absolutely untrue.
It pretends it's neutral. It pretends it's neutral.
I just want to bring Vakhtang in here. Vakhtang, what was your thoughts?
My opinion is that it's impossible to establish absolutely neutral public space because whether somebody wants it or not, European civilization is based on Christianity, and we see the traces of Christianity at every place. I mean, in art, in architecture, wherever. And for example, if we are speaking about public fora, look just through the window and you see the crosses on the top of Christian cathedrals in London, in Moscow, in most of European cities. And these crosses are situated in public fora. And if we are following this utopia concept of neutral public space, that means that we should demolish crosses from the tops of our cathedrals as well, because they might insult somebody. It is utopia, I think. I think that secularity, or secularism as we call it, as all other public or, legal concepts, has its limits. We don't have to go to exaggerate the role of secularity in our public sphere, because if we do, that means that we destroy our own civilization. And it just nearly happened in Russia when communists came to power in 1917, as I said. They tried to destroy the old world and to build a new one, but that meant collapse of the most of Russian culture, and it will take us years and years to restore what they actually destroyed. I can't support the attempts to do the same in any other country.
Nigel Barnes from the Hampstead Humanist Society.
Yes, the idea that European civilization is based on Christianity is partly true. As far as Britain is concerned, it's also partly true. I say partly because there are other elements, very important ones. Anglo-Saxon, for example. The idea of a parliament, I think, is Anglo-Saxon. Greek, using your reason to discover truth. Roman, the notion of law, civic responsibility. Renaissance ideas, question things, the scientific attitude. And Christian. Christianity is part of it. I think a lot of the trouble that Christians in Britain have, some Christians, with secularism, is that they are losing their privileges, which they've had for a very, very long time. And naturally, they don't like it.
Just a reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. Joining me at the moment is Nigel Barnes from the Hampstead Humanist Society, Terry Sanderson from the National Secular Society, Andrea Williams, the director of the Christian Legal Centre, and Vakhtang Kibshidze from the OSCE. Is this just an issue of religious equality, Angela?
I think that it's right in a sense what Nigel has been saying with regard to the public space, but a nation has to choose. A nation has to choose her identity. It's not just a question of Christians losing their privileges. I think we have to look back and say, what is it that made our country free? What is it that made our country a great democracy? What is it that made our country a country where people wanted to come and actually extended to people of all races and religion, great hospitality? Well, that is Christianity. It's a great and wonderful and fantastic religion that shapes and moulds cultures. And we have flourished because those are our roots. There are prayers said in Parliament at the beginning of every day. That was our root. Our judicial system, the same. Our root, our educational system, our social welfare systems, all founded and based upon great Christian precepts. And that has allowed for freedom and flourishing. Now what is happening, and it's happened very rapidly in the last decade or two, is an attempt for a new political ideology to come in and subvert the Christian ideology and to remove it from the public sphere. And and that, I believe, is a great shame for the whole of our culture. And what it's beginning to do, first of all, we have disinformation, then we have discrimination, and we're beginning to see that very clearly against Christians. You're unable, if you disagree with the new political orthodoxy, which has been enshrined in law, if you disagree, you find yourselves at odds with the establishment, and you find yourself losing your job. Yes, not killed. Yes, not put in prison. Not that kind of persecution, but that is what we're beginning to see in this nation.
In what context are we seeing this?
We're seeing Christian registrars unable to keep their jobs, despite the fact they may have had their jobs for 25 or 30 years.
Wanting to persecute other people.
They absolutely don't want to persecute other people. They absolutely don't. If you have
they do. If she doesn't want to do her job because she doesn't want to provide a service that the council has employed her to give, because the people she has to serve are homosexuals, then that is a form of persecution against them. They have rights too. Why should she take them away because she's a Christian?
Well, certainly in the case of Lillian and Deli and Teresa Davis, we knew that in Islington there were 18 registrars. 2 of them objected.
That didn't matter. It's a principle of equality.
2 of them objected. No, because they were perfectly happily in a reasonable system to do more births, deaths and marriages.
That's not good enough.
They were perfectly happy to do that.
That's insulting to the people who are rejected and said you're not entitled to the services that everybody else is entitled to.
Of course, Terry, what you can't understand, what you're unable to understand in this particular circumstances, that for the Christian, any sexual expression...
I don't care what the Christian wants, because they have to obey the law that everybody else has to obey. For the Christian, any sexual expression outside of marriage is contrary to God's purposes. That doesn't matter.
It's not about a personal objection to the homosexual at all.
It's about the law.
It's not a personal objection to the same-sex couple at all. It's about a conscientious objection, which then flows into much greater things in terms of the redefinition of some of the very foundations of society. This isn't just about homosexual rights. It's moving now, as we know, very currently in our system, to the redefinition of marriage, which leads to the redefinition of family, which leads to the redefinition of culture. If a magistrate loses his job because he refuses to place a child with... Well, he in fact didn't... homosexuals have rarely refused a service. He just wanted to be rostered off, where the outcome might be the placing of a child with 2 men or 2 women because he believes that a child needs a mother and father and doesn't want to be involved in that system. It's where the system can accommodate him, can accommodate him, that ought to be done. And it's certainly not about prejudice to the homosexual. It's about living according to Christian faith.
Principle.
Can I just bring in Nigel here?
I agree with 1/6 of what Angela is saying. She gave a list of things that democracy and so on, Christian roots. Christianity is one of the roots of our society, I would say. One, very important one, but only one. Love thy neighbour as thyself, I would say. I personally don't see any sign of democracy in Christian. I don't think democracy is a Christian idea at all.
They resisted it every step of the way.
And so it's one of the roots. Of course, people should not be persecuted because of their faith. It depends what the faith believes. Faith is not just something abstract. It leads to behaviour. And some behaviour may be considered by others, not of that faith, as uncivilised, against civic order, unfair.
What about in these cases that Andrea has thrown up, where there is a kind of a moral battle with what your job entails that you should do, but what you feel inside?
Yes, well, it's very difficult, because if you look at British history, there have been people who are now considered to be right who disobeyed the law. So morality really, it's a very dangerous thing to say, is above the law. If you've got a clash between the law and your conscience, you should follow your conscience. So I think a lot of Christians would agree with me on that. So if you take individual cases, you've really got to decide, as far as you know all the evidence, in that individual case. There's no general rule of when the Christian conscience should be followed and when it should not be followed, decided by non-Christians. Christians can decide that sort of thing. But if you're a state employee, getting your salary from the state, and the state decides that such and such a law must be followed, and you don't follow it, you can't really complain if the state is nasty to you.
Vakhtang, can I bring you in here? Obviously, how does this religious freedom play out in Russia?
I first would like to share the reaction that came from one of the official representatives of the Moscow Patriarchate with regards to the new stage of the disputes on the crosses at work. When one of the representatives of the Moscow Patriarchate learned about this initiative and the position of the British government with regard to this case in the European Court of Human Rights, he said that he wondered what would happen if somebody tried to ban symbols of homosexuality at public fora in Great Britain. As we know, some homosexual employees wear these small but quite visible signs or symbols of their homosexual orientation. But nobody has ever tried to put a ban on these symbols.
I'm afraid they have.
But if somebody tried to do that, I think that the reaction would be different from the liberal press, at least.
What about in the case of someone carrying out their job where they have a moral difficulty with what their job tells them they have to do, the responsibilities that they signed up to when they took the job?
I think that morality, of course, is at the top of each human's priorities, and I don't agree that if I agree, in fact, with the I think Peter, who told that if government adopts a law which is against your own understanding of morals, so of course each Christian is to follow his moral obligations in that case. And I'm afraid that this happens with some part of our modern liberal legislation, when you, for example, are obliged to register homosexual unions, but you are Christian and you believe in traditional family as a union between male and female. Of course, it goes against your conscience, and you have to make your choice. And it is not very, I would say, convenient if the only choice is to be fired from your working place. I think that it is against freedom, and generally, I don't know if there is sense for legislation if it infringes human freedom like that.
I'll come to you, Andrew. You wanted to...
Well, just that we have to remember that the legislation is relatively new. Civil partnerships legislation came in 2004, and many of the cases that we are dealing with are employees who've been in their job for 20 or 30 years. And so there is the conflict comes now when they're actually being asked to apply law that contravenes their conscience. Of course, if they were applying for a job, and this is where it's very sinister and very chilling, if they were applying for a job, they would be asked about how they would feel about presiding over same-sex civil partnerships.
Is that a concern for you?
It is a concern, because Christians will not be able to do so. A Christian that follows the Bible will not be able to preside over a same-sex civil partnership. So they're
Terry, can I bring you in here? Should someone be
space.
having this battle between their own moral conscience and what their job responsibility is?
Well, I think if society has made a decision about what the law should say, and in this instance it has, after a very long and protracted debate over decades, it decided to give homosexuals equal rights, and that was enshrined in law. Now Christians come along and say, we don't want to follow this law. Well, that their conscience is theirs, that's fine. But if they don't want to follow the law, they must find another job.
Can I bring you in, Nigel, here? If you've got this battle between your own moral views and your job responsibility?
Yes, well, you have to take each case individually, I think. But as a general rule, well, as I just said, if your conscience tells you it's wrong, then that's the supreme judge.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time today. My thanks to all of my guests: Nigel Barnes from the Hampstead Humanist Society, Terry Sanderson, the President of the National Secular Society, Andrea Williams, the Director of Christian Legal Centre, and Vachtan Kibshitsia at the Organisation for Security Cooperation in Europe.